and welcome to Short Stories. I'm your host, Martin. I'm very excited about today's story because it's based on the work of my favorite author, Mark Twain. In 1873, Mr. Twain and Charles D. Warner published a novel called The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today. It describes the struggles of the Hawkins family as it tries to pull itself out of poverty through a series of speculative ventures. This book captured the opulence and corruption of the time period so well that historians now refer to the years 1870 to 1900 as the Gilded Age. The original story consisted of 63 short chapters. I've cut this down considerably to narrow the focus of the story on just the key characters. I've also added some historical context to help you understand what is happening. I also tried to capture Mark Twain's dry wit and humor, but I'm afraid that I was not fully successful. Who could be? At any rate, I hope you at least learned something about American history and politics. Vocabulary: speculative, speculative. He lost his life savings due to a speculative purchase of cryptocurrency. Be in dire straits, be in dire straits. The bank was in dire straits and was forced to file for bankruptcy. Suck up, suck up. Bill got his promotion by sucking up to the boss. Appropriation, appropriation. The committee voted in favor of the highway appropriation. Cosmopolitan, cosmopolitan. Los Angeles is a large, cosmopolitan city. Influence, influence. The senator used his influence to pass the amendment. Worm one's way, worm one's way. Jim wormed his way into the board of directors. Coquettish, coquettish. Laura used her coquettish manners to influence members of Congress. The story. Laura Van Brunt was the adopted daughter of Silas and Nancy Hawkins. She had been orphaned when a steamboat explosion killed both of her parents. The Hawkins family, although they were poor and already had two sons, Washington and Clay, decided to take in one more desperate soul. They raised Laura like she was one of their own. She grew up to be proud, intelligent, ambitious, and a real beauty. Silas Hawkins, the patriarch of the family, was a hopeless dreamer and optimist. He was always following his friend Mr. Sellers into speculative business ventures. There was a slave deal in Virginia that fell through, the perpetual motion machine in Kentucky that exploded, and the purchase of 75,000 acres of worthless land in Tennessee. Silas Hawkins was obsessed with that land. He was convinced that it contained a secret fortune in coal or copper. "Our children will be millionaires one day," he used to tell his wife. At the time of this story, the Hawkins family were living in the town of Hawkeye, Missouri. In the previous 12 years, Mr. Sellers and Silas Hawkins had made and lost two modest fortunes. The Hawkins family was now in its most dire straits. They were out of money, and Silas could not find a suitable buyer for his land in Tennessee. I say suitable because there were buyers, but they were offering a price that Silas thought was too low, so he rejected them, much to the chagrin of his poor wife. Things became even worse when Silas became suddenly very ill. All the Hawkins children were called back home to comfort their father in his final moments. Silas called his family to his bedside and said, "I am leaving you in cruel poverty. I have been so foolish, So short-sighted. But courage! A better day is coming. Never lose sight of the Tennessee land. Be wary. There is wealth stored up for you there. Wealth that is boundless." The old man then slowly closed his eyes and exhaled his last breath. The decade after Silas's death was a period of monumental upheaval, not just for the Hawkins family, but for the nation as a whole. The Civil War rocked Missouri to its core and divided towns and families. Poor Washington Hawkins became a Confederate soldier and was captured. Fortunately for him, he was just as foolish as his father, a fact that the Union commander recognized quickly. They decided that the best way to hamper the Confederate war effort would be to release Washington Hawkins back into the rebel camp. Washington returned to Hawkeye after the war and got a job as a clerk for Mr. Boswell, a former Confederate general. Mr. Sellers, since the death of his friend and business partner, was now looking for a replacement. He found one in Mr. Boswell. They bought large tracts of land in the neighboring county and planned to develop the area. They had even hired an engineer, Harry Brierly, to draw up some plans. All they needed was some money, and they knew just where to get it. One day, the humble town of Hawkeye was graced with a visit from a most esteemed and noble person, Senator Dilworthy. Senator Dilworthy had been a staunch Unionist during the war, but that didn't stop old Confederates like Mr. Sellers and Mr. Boswell from sucking up to him. "Hawkeye is honored by your presence," said Mr. Sellers, "and you will find every door open, and a welcome at every hearthstone. Why don't you come over to my house for dinner?" During dinner, Mr. Sellers and Mr. Boswell did their best to flatter the senator. After they had satiated their bellies and the senator's ego, they asked Washington Hawkins to bring in the infrastructure plans. "If we widen and deepen this river," explained Mr. Sellers as he pointed at a map, "we'll be able to get steamboats all the way up here." The senator contemplated this for a second and said, "It would require quite a considerable appropriation." Mr. Sellers smiled and said, "I'd say about $1 million should do the trick." The senator himself was not very much interested in the country or the river, but he favored the appropriation, and he hinted that he would endeavor to get it through. "We're gonna be rich," thought Sellers and Boswell. To seal the deal and make sure that the senator's appropriation bill made it through the House of Representatives, Mr. Sellers had an idea. "That Hawkins girl is a superb woman," he said to Boswell. "There are men I know who would give her a railroad or an opera house or whatever she wanted. At least they'd promise." Boswell then asked Washington to invite Laura to a meeting with the senator. Laura, for her part, was not at all ignorant of what was going on. She agreed to the meeting, but she had her own agenda. She was going to use the senator to make the federal government purchase her father's land in Tennessee. Laura's wit and charm worked. The senator was so taken with her that he invited her to stay in Washington, D.C. during the winter season. This was her chance to enter high society and improve her family's fortunes. The capital of our great republic was a new world to the country-bred Laura. Unlike St. Louis, which was the largest city that she had ever seen, Washington, D.C. was a very cosmopolitan place. The city attracted people from the four corners of the country, so there was a wide variety of faces, food, and fashion. Perhaps the reader has never been there. I will endeavor to explain it to you. Washington, D.C. was built on a fetid swamp. In the late 1860s, it was still only half built. Due to its transient population, there were 118 hotels in D.C., but there was only one good one, and the odds of you finding it were practically zero. If you took a walk down Pennsylvania Avenue, you would see a snow-white palace projecting above a grove of trees, and a tall, graceful white dome with a statue on it, which pleasantly contrasts with the background of blue sky. This is the Capitol building. Gossips will tell you that by the original estimates, it was to cost $12 million. But the government managed to complete the project for only $21,200,000 over budget, which was considered a stunning success by Washington standards. As for the population of Washington, D.C., it consisted entirely of government employees and their landlords. Landlords, it should be noted, did not like to rent to members of Congress, as they had a habit of leaving before paying their bill. And one of the first and most startling things you will find out is that every individual you encounter in the city of Washington, from the highest bureau chief to the maid who scrubs department halls, received their employment through the assistance of political influence. Unless you can get the ear of a senator or a congressman or a chief of a bureau or department and persuade him to use his influence on your behalf, you cannot get an employment of the most trivial nature in Washington. Mere merit, fitness, and capability are useless baggage to you without influence. This was the world that Laura was about to navigate and exploit for her family's advantage. Laura used her wit and good graces to worm her way into the heart of Washington's elite society. She made all the right friends, attended all the right parties, and said all the right things. Laura, using the influence of Senator Dilworthy, arranged a meeting with the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Buckstone. She approached the chairman with a sunny smile and said, "It is a distinction indeed for a country-bred girl like me to speak to people of brains and culture like yourself. Could I trouble you for a few minutes?" Laura then explained how the land in Tennessee was rich in coal and copper, and that the federal government could profit handsomely from the purchase of 75,000 acres of prime real estate. Using her skills in flirtation and persuasion, she convinced Mr. Buckstone to submit a bill for the purchase of her father's land. After the chairman had left, Laura sat silently and thought to herself, "He is fairly hooked, poor thing. I can reel him in at my leisure. He will vote for my bill, no fear about that. Moreover, he will work for it, too, before I am done with him. Well, it is a good night's work, but this is a desperate game I am playing, a wearing, sordid, heartless game. If I lose everything, even myself. And if I win the game, will it be worth its cost after all? I do not know. Sometimes I have doubts. Sometimes I half wish I had not begun. But no matter, I have begun, and I will never turn back. I will play to win." A net cast wide will catch a lot of fish, including some that you did not want. This is what happened as a consequence of Laura's coquettish habits. While in Washington, D.C., Laura lived in a house owned by her patron, Senator Dilworthy. She was in close contact with Mr. Sellers and Harry Brierly, the engineer. Harry was staying in the house next door. They met frequently to discuss the infrastructure project, which wasn't actually necessary. It was just an excuse that Harry used to get close to Laura. Laura, however, was too busy scheming about how to manipulate the bigwigs in Washington to notice Harry's affection for her. One day, this all came to a head at a gala at the senator's house. In the parlor, away from the other guests, Harry declared his love for her. "I've loved you since the day we met," he declared. Laura was at first confused, then annoyed. She tried her best not to hurt his feelings, but there was no way to let this lovesick puppy down easy. "I'm sorry if I gave you the impression that I had romantic feelings for you," Laura explained. "But what about all the flirtatious glances and intimate conversations we had?" said the heartbroken Harry. "That was just business," said Laura. Harry left in a cloud of shame and anger. A couple of days later, Laura woke up late, as usual, and read the morning paper. She was so shocked by what she saw that she spat out her coffee. The headline on the paper was as follows: "Young gentleman murdered in D.C. Young lady a suspect." Suddenly, Laura heard a knock at the door. She looked through the window and saw 2 police officers. She decided to make a run for it. She hastily gathered her things and climbed out the back window. While keeping a low profile, she made her way to the nearest railway station. On the train, she read the rest of the paper and received yet another shock. Senator Dilworthy was arrested for bribery. "Without Dilworthy's influence," lamented Laura, "my bill has no chance of getting through the Senate." Laura sank into her seat and covered her face with her hands. "I have played the game and rolled snake eyes. I have lost everything." Will Laura be convicted of murder? Will her bill pass the Senate? To find out, you can read the rest of the story on Gutenberg.org. The questions. Number 1. What was Silas Hawkins's dream for the future? A. He wanted to be the President of the United States. B. He wanted to sell his land for a lot of money. C. He wanted Laura to be a senator. D. He wanted to murder Harry. The answer is B. He wanted to sell his land for a lot of money. Question 2. What did Mr. Sellers want from Senator Dilworthy? A. $1 million. B. A marriage proposal. C. A new assistant. D. Free train tickets. The answer is A. $1 million. Question 3. Why did Laura want to go to Washington, D.C.? A. She wanted to marry Senator Dilworthy. B. She wanted to buy some land. C. She wanted to sell some land. D. She was elected to Congress. The answer is C. She wanted to sell some land. Question 4. Why did Laura want to leave Washington, D.C. at the end? A. She achieved her goals. B. She got married to Harry. C. She missed home. D. She was wanted for murder. The answer is D. She was wanted for murder.